The wind rolled down from the high ridges like a curse, dragging dust across the abandoned trail where only ghosts dared linger. A single rider came through that dust, hunched beneath a wide-brimmed hat, his silhouette stretched long across the dying light. His coat was the color of dried blood, faded at the shoulders, torn near the hem. The horse beneath him breathed hard, nostrils flared but did not falter. They had been riding for 3 days. 3 days without a word spoken, 3 days with only silence and the ticking weight of memory. The man's name was Ethan Rowe, though he hadn't answered to it in over a year. Not since the fire, not since the marshals came with names and accusations, not since his brother lay dying in the barn with blood on his chest and betrayal in his breath. They said Ethan had killed him. The townsfolk in Redstone whispered it like gospel, said a man who'd spill kin blood couldn't be trusted with a handshake, let alone a home. So Ethan rode, not to escape, but because he had nowhere left to return to. The town he approached now was nothing more than a huddle of wooden bones clinging to a dry creek bed. Painted Rock, it was called, though no one had seen paint or rain in months. The saloon sign hung by one rusted chain, swinging gently in the breeze like a warning bell. Ethan dismounted, boots hitting the dirt with a thud that startled a pair of vultures off a nearby post. He tied the reins loosely, knowing the mare wouldn't bolt. She was loyal in the way broken things often are. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with old smoke and older silence. A piano leaned against the far wall, untouched and out of tune. One man played cards with himself. Another slept with his hat pulled over his face. The bartender, a wiry man with a crooked mustache, looked up but said nothing. Ethan stepped to the bar and placed a single coin on the wood. "Whiskey," he said. His voice cracked like it hadn't been used in a week, which was close to truth. The bartender poured without comment. Ethan drank without tasting. The door creaked again behind him, and this time the silence shifted. A girl stepped in, no older than 20, hair braided in 2 thick ropes, eyes sharp and too steady for someone her age. She walked with purpose. Not fear, not pride, purpose. "I'm looking for the man who rides with a scar under his right eye," she said aloud. Her voice cut the room like a blade. Ethan didn't flinch, but his left hand twitched slightly. Near his belt, the girl's eyes found him. "That you?" He didn't answer, just turned slowly. The scar she mentioned was there, faint beneath the bone, old and half forgotten. She stepped closer. "Name's Clara Finch, my father sent." "Me," Ethan's brow furrowed. "Your father?" "Said if I ever got in trouble, I should find the man who saved him outside Laramie Pass, 10 years ago." "Said your name was Ethan Rowe?" The room held its breath. The bartender stopped polishing his glass. Even the card player looked up. Ethan stared at her a long time. 10 years was a long trail, and he'd saved a lot of men who didn't stay saved for long. "He didn't say I'd be followed," she added. That's when the second rider came in. Dust-covered, tall, and not alone. The second rider pushed through the saloon doors with a kind of stillness that didn't belong in men who wore guns on both hips. He was tall, lean, and moved like water down a cold rock, slow and deliberate. His eyes scanned the room and settled on Clara first, then on Ethan. "There's a bounty," he said, low but clear. $1,000, dead or alive. Ethan didn't move. Neither did Clara. The man stepped forward, a grin pulling at the corner of his mouth like a scar being stretched. "You must be Ethan Rowe, lucky day." The bartender ducked behind the counter without a word. The card player vanished into the back. The man reached for his revolver and never got it clear of the holster. Ethan moved like a storm breaking. A single shot, loud and sharp, cracked through the silence, and the bounty hunter dropped, his gun clattering beside his twitching fingers. Clara didn't flinch. She stared at Ethan like she had already expected him to be faster than death. Ethan holstered his Colt and picked up the whiskey glass, finishing it slow. "You sure your father sent you?" he asked. Clara nodded. "Told me to find you. Said the world eat me if I didn't." Ethan looked down at the dead man bleeding. "On the floor, looks like it already started." He turned to the bartender. "You got a back door?" The man nodded without standing. "Behind the stove." Ethan motioned for Clara. "Let's go." She followed him through the kitchen, her boots quiet on the warped floorboards. Outside, the alley was narrow, the shadows long. Ethan's mare waited where he left her, but Clara had no horse. "You ride?" he asked. "Since I was 6. He pulled her up behind him without another word and spurred the mare into motion. They rode out of Painted Rock before the law even had time to yawn. The dust followed them like a second shadow. For a long time neither spoke. The sky bled orange into violet, and the land stretched wide and empty in every direction. Finally, Clara said, "You didn't ask why I came." Ethan kept his eyes on the horizon. "Figured you'd tell me if you wanted to?" "They're coming for me," she said. "Not lawmen. Worse. Harlan Finch is my father, but he ain't what folks remember. He ran with the Red River gang before he disappeared." Ethan turned slightly in the saddle. "Your father was an outlaw?" "Still, as far as I know." But he turned on them. Gave names, burned bridges, took a bullet to the ribs and vanished. "You pulled him out of that canyon when they left him for dead?" "That's what he told me." "I remember," Ethan said quietly. "He gave you that scar, didn't he?" Ethan didn't answer. Clara continued. "Now they're hunting him. Only they couldn't find him, so they came for me." A crow called overhead, sharp and sudden. Ethan slowed the mare, scanning the ridgelines. "You bring that trouble to Painted Rock?" "I didn't have a choice." "You always got a choice," he muttered. "You just don't always like the ones you have." They stopped beside a dry wash where the wind twisted through brittle mesquite. Ethan dismounted and scanned the tracks. "We've got maybe 2 hours, then they'll catch the trail." "And when they do?" Clara asked. Ethan looked at her, the last light catching the edge of his scar. "Then we stop running." They camped without fire. The stars above were scattered like ash across black velvet, and the cold crept in slow and steady, wrapping around the bones like regret. Ethan crouched beside a dry mesquite bush, cleaning his revolver with the calm of a man who'd seen too much to be rattled. Clara sat with her knees tucked to her chest, watching him through the darkness. "You ever run with them?" she asked quietly. Ethan didn't look up. "Red River gang?" "Yeah, no, but I've shot at him." "Rode with men who did worse." Clara pulled her shawl tighter. "Why'd you save my father?" Ethan paused. He was bleeding out in a gulch, talking about a daughter he'd never see again. "Sometimes that's enough." "He said you used to be a preacher." Ethan smirked without humor. "I wore a collar." "Doesn't mean I believed much in salvation." "You believe in anything now?" "Lead? When? The sound a man makes when he lies." The silence after that felt heavier. Clara shifted, rubbing her hands together. "Do you think they'll come tonight?" "No," Ethan said. "They ain't ghosts. They'll wait for daylight. Makes the killing easier to count." She nodded slowly. "Do you always talk like this?" "Like what?" "Like the world ended and you're the only one who remembers how it burned." He gave a dry chuckle. "Maybe it did. Maybe it's still burning." She looked at him then, really looked. "You think I'm stupid for coming to find you?" "No," he said. "I think you're the only one with enough sense to know when to run," a coyote called in the distance, long and low. Ethan stood and moved to the edge of the wash, scanning the horizon. "We ride before sunup," he said. "They'll expect us to wait." "Where are we headed?" "South. There's a place near Copper Ridge, a friend who owes me more than he'd like to admit." "Safe?" "No such thing," Ethan replied. "But it's got walls and bullets and men who don't ask questions unless you pay 'em to." She stood too, brushing dust from her skirt. "You always live like this?" "No," he said. "Sometimes it's worse." Before she could answer, a sound broke the stillness, distant, faint, but unmistakable. Horses, more than 2, maybe 5 or 6, moving slow, circling wide. Ethan crouched again, pulling Clara down beside him. "They're closer than I thought." "What do we do?" she whispered. "We let 'em think we're gone. Then we move like shadows. You think they'll shoot on sight?" "They won't talk first. Then maybe I should carry a gun." Ethan looked at her, then pulled a small Colt from his belt and handed it over grip first. "Ever used one?" "Once," she said. "Don't remember if I hit anything. Just point where you don't want 'em breathing anymore." She nodded and held the revolver tight. The hoofbeats grew louder, then began to fade as if circling back the other way. Ethan waited, breath held, muscles taut. Then the silence returned. He turned to Clara. "We move, now." They slipped through the wash, ducking beneath brush, moving east toward a ridgeline that might offer cover. The moon lit their path, but Ethan moved like someone who preferred the dark. Clara followed, each step steadier than the last. Behind them, in the camp they left cold and empty, a single boot print marked the earth, small, sharp, unmistakable. A tracker would find it by morning, but by then they'd be somewhere else or they'd be dead. They reached the ridge before dawn, breath fogging and the cold legs aching with the weight of miles and fear. Ethan led them to a shallow cave, TUC, resting in her lap. "You think they'll find us?" she asked. "Eventually," Ethan said, "but not today." He pulled a canteen from the saddle and handed it to her. "Drink slow. You'll feel it more when you stop." She nodded and took a small sip, then looked out toward the west where the sky was beginning to bruise with light. "You really think your friend will help us?" "He's not a friend," Ethan muttered. "Just a man with a grudge that costs more to hold than to forgive." "What happened?" "I let his brother hang." Clara froze. "You let him hang? Didn't pull the rope? Didn't cut it either?" She looked at him like she wanted to ask more, but didn't. Instead, she whispered, "That why you stopped preaching?" Ethan didn't answer. He just sat, back against stone, revolver across his knees, watching the light crawl over the land, like it didn't know who it belonged to. Below, the desert spread wide and open, no movement yet, no dust trails, no riders, just the slow exhale of a day not yet decided. "When I was little," Clara said, "I used to think the desert was quiet, peaceful, but it's not. It listens, remembers, holds on to things that should have been buried." Ethan nodded slightly. "It's a graveyard with a better view. How many people have you killed?" He glanced at her. "Why ask now?" "Because I think I just watched you kill a man in the saloon and didn't blink." "Then maybe you're changing too." She looked down at her hands, pale knuckles wrapped around the gun. "I don't want to become like them." "Then don't," Ethan said. "Shoot. Only when you have to. Walk away when you can. And if you can't walk away, make sure you're the one who walks out." For a while, the only sound was wind curling through rock and the slow, steady chewing of the horse below. Then Clara said, "I think they burned our place." "Ethan's." Eyes flicked to her. "Your home?" She nodded. "Last I heard, one of the Red River boys, name was Doyle, came through with 2 others. Said my father owed them blood and money. I was out at the creek when the smoke rose. I didn't go back, just ran." "You sure they'll follow you this far?" "If they think I know where my father is, they'll ride through hell to find me." "Then let's give them something to find," Ethan said, standing. "Copper Ridge is still half a day if we cut through Devil's Wash. We ride hard, we make it by sundown. And if they catch us first, then we don't stop moving." He held out his hand. She took it, stood, and for the first time, didn't look like a girl running. She looked like someone ready to make them bleed for the chase. Ethan watched her mount the mare and couldn't help but think of someone else. A different girl. Different years ago, someone who didn't get away. "Let's ride," he said. And together they turned south toward a place that had no promises, only guns, grudges, and the slim chance of survival. The trail to Devil's Wash was little more than a scar through stone, a sun-bleached wound, between canyon walls where the wind carried whispers and vultures waited for mistakes. Ethan led the mare with a quiet urgency, every hoofbeat echoing too loud. Every bend in the rock a place where death might wait. Clara rode behind him, jaw clenched, hands firm on the saddle horn, the colt hidden beneath her coat but close enough to feel. They hadn't spoken since sunrise, not because there was nothing to say, but because silence was safer now, like holding your breath near a sleeping beast. Midway through the canyon, Ethan stopped. "There," he said, pointing to a narrow cleft in the rock. "It used to be a smuggler's pass. Cuts 2 hours off the ride, but it's tight." "Tight enough to trap us?" Clara asked. "Only if we get careless." He led them in single file, weaving between boulders, guiding the mare through places even coyotes hesitated to tread. The air was thick here, old and dry, and the sunlight barely reached the ground. The walls felt like they were listening. About halfway through, Clara whispered, "You trust this place?" "No," Ethan muttered, "but I trust what's behind us less." That was when the shot rang out. It cracked off the stone with a shriek, ricocheted past Clara's shoulder, and sent the mare rearing. She held tight, barely staying in the saddle. Ethan ducked low, drawing his Colt and scanning the ridge. Another shot followed, then a voice echoed from above. "Ethan Rowe, you ride with ghosts now?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Doyle," he muttered. "Thought I smelled snake." The man stood on a rock outcropping, rifle resting against his hip, 3 more behind him, all wearing the dust and smirk of Red River killers. "That girl?" Doyle called. "She's coming with us. Your bones can stay here if you'd rather." "She's not yours to take," Ethan said calmly. "Neither were those horses in Wichita, but your boys took them anyway." Doyle grinned. You can't save everyone, preacher. Ain't trying to, Ethan said. Just this one. Then he moved. The shot came fast, clean, dropped the man beside Doyle before he could lift his rifle. Chaos erupted. Bullets rang out like hail, stone chips flying, echoes screaming through the canyon. Ethan pushed Clara down behind a boulder, covering her, with his own body as rounds zipped overhead. Stay down, he said, reloading fast. I can help. You help by surviving. He rose, fired twice, one shot winging a rider above, the other forcing Doyle to take cover. Clara pulled. The Colt from her coat, heart pounding, hands shaking, but not too much. She aimed, breathed like Ethan told her, and squeezed. One of the men dropped, falling backwards into the rocks with a scream that never finished. Ethan turned just long enough to nod. They moved then, slipping between rocks, climbing higher, each shot counting. 2 more went down. The last turned and fled, his rifle forgotten, his courage spent. Doyle remained, crouched behind a ledge, wounded in the leg, blood dripping down his boot. You don't have to die here, Ethan called out. You can walk away, Doyle laughed, bitter and broken. Ain't no walking away from men like me. Then die where you stand. A final shot cracked. Dust rose, silence followed. Clara peeked around the rock. Doyle was gone, nothing left but blood on stone and the buzz of flies. She looked at Ethan. Did we win? No, he said. We survived. That's different. They descended the pass slowly, smoke and blood behind them, Copper Ridge still far ahead. The wind was picking up again, and so were the questions. Neither of them had dared ask yet. They rode into Copper Ridge at dusk, the sky bleeding rust behind the hills, the wind thick with wood smoke and suspicion. It wasn't a town exactly, more like a gathering of grudges and saloons nailed to dust. A place where names changed fast and graves were shallow. Ethan slowed the Mary near a lopsided stable, dismounted, and helped Clara down. She staggered slightly but caught herself. Her face was pale, her eyes unreadable. This the place? She asked. It's not much, Ethan said, but the man who runs the old mill owes me more than coin. You said he hated you. He did, Ethan replied. But hate ain't what it used to be. Too many people been killed for less. They made their way down a side street past shuttered windows and crooked porches. No one called out, no one stared long. That was the code in Copper Ridge. You keep your eyes to your drink, your hand, near your hip, and your business to yourself. The mill sat at the edge of the settlement, half burned, rebuilt, then burned again. A wooden sign dangled above the door, barely readable, Hobbs and Sons, grain, rope, justice. Ethan knocked twice, then once more sharp and slow. Footsteps echoed inside, cautious, and then the door creaked open. A barrel-chested man with one arm and eyes like rust stared back. Hell, he said. I thought you were dead. Most days I think so too, Ethan said. Can we come in? Hobbs squinted at Clara, then stepped aside without a word. The room inside smelled of old tobacco and older secrets. A fire crackled in a black iron stove, and maps covered the walls like bandages over bullet holes. Clara stood near the door, unsure. Hobbs poured a glass of something brown and bitter. Who's the girl? Clara Finch. That name's trouble, Hobbs said. You know her father? I knew the man he was, Ethan replied. I don't know who he became. Hobbs drained the glass. Nobody does. Not anymore. I need a favor, Hobbs snorted. You got a damn nerve. I know. What is it? A place to hide. 2 days, maybe 3. Then we're gone. Hobbs leaned back in his chair, eyeing them both. You still carrying that iron gospel in your bones? Ethan said nothing. Hobbs sighed. Fine, you can stay. But if it goes bad, I ain't burying either of you. Wouldn't expect you. 2. Clara looked at Ethan as they were led down a back hall to a small room with one bed and a cracked window. You sure he won't sell us out? No, Ethan said. But I'm sure we're out of better options. That night the wind howled like it had news it couldn't wait to tell. Clara lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. You ever think about just disappearing? She asked. Ethan sat by the window, watching shadows move outside. Every day. Why don't you? Because ghosts don't vanish. They haunt? She was quiet for a long time. What happens after this? After Copper Ridge? After the men stop chasing, after the killing stops. Ethan didn't answer right away. Then finally he said, I'll let you know when it does, but he didn't believe it ever would. Not for men like him? Not for girls carrying blood? Debts. And outside, in the dark beyond the last light of the mill, a pair of riders sat watching, waiting, already whispering their names. Morning came slow and gray, a cold light spilling through the cracked window like it wasn't sure it belonged. There, Ethan was already up, already watching. He hadn't slept, not really. Not since before the canyon, before Doyle, before the girl with fire in her voice showed up dragging old names and older dangers behind her. Clara stirred beneath the threadbare blanket, eyes fluttering open. She looked at him first, then the window. They out there? She asked. Not yet, Ethan said, but they will be. She sat up, rubbing sleep from her shoulders. I dreamed of fire, she said quietly. Our cabin. My mother's shawl burned down to ash. Ethan didn't respond. Some dreams didn't need interpreting. He reached for his coat and the belt where his Colt hung, checking the cylinder. Slow and precise. Clara watched him like someone trying to memorize a ritual. You ever get tired of this? This? Waking up every day like it's a coin toss? Ethan looked at her. It's not a coin toss. It's just the same side again and again. A knock at the door cut the quiet in half. Ethan was on his feet before the second knock landed. He pulled it open with one hand on the Colt. Hobbs stood there, jaw tight, rifle slung across his back. They're here. How many? 4 I can see. Might be more. Who? Men wearing dust-like armor. Didn't ask names. But they're asking for you. They mentioned the girl? Not yet, but they will. Ethan nodded once. You still got that old tunnel? Hobbs smirked. I'm a bastard, not a fool. Good. Then it's time we disappeared again. Ain't that many places left to disappear to? We don't need many, just one. They gathered what little they had. A canteen, a pouch of jerky, the Colt, and Clara's steady hands. Hobbs led them down through the floorboards into a tunnel dug years back for whiskey smuggling and quicker exits. It smelled like dust and secrets. This comes out near the old well? Ethan asked. About 30 yards west of it. After that, you're on your own. We've always been. They crawled through the dark for what felt like miles, backs scraping wood, hearts thudding in rhythm with their breath. When they emerged, the morning had grown colder. Clara blinked at the light, then turned her eyes toward the edge of town. Where now? There's a bluff 2 miles south, Ethan said. We can watch from there, see who's hunting who. They moved quick through brush and frost, staying low, following deer paths and shadows. When they reached the bluff, Ethan pulled out a pair of old field glasses, scratched but serviceable. He watched Copper Ridge from above, the buildings like chess pieces on a cracked board. They're splitting up, he said. They're hunting now? Clara pulled her coat tighter. How many? 6, maybe more. She was quiet, then said, If they catch me, they won't. But if they do, then they'll wish they hadn't. Ethan lowered the glasses. You see that ridge to the east? She nodded. That's where we're going, after dark. What's there? A church. You believe in God again? No, he said. But the priest there owes me a sin. Below, one of the riders paused, looked up. Just for a second, Ethan stiffened. Time to move. You think he saw us? I think he felt something. And that's enough. As they turned to go, the first shot rang out. Not from town, but from the tree line just west of the bluff. Clara dropped low. Ethan turned with the Colt already drawn. A bullet struck the rock inches from his head. They flanked us, he muttered. They're learning. Clara's eyes burned. So are we. The second shot came fast, splintering the stone above Clara's shoulder. Ethan yanked her down behind a juniper stump, dust rising like smoke. 3 shooters, he hissed. Maybe 4. You sure? I'm alive, ain't I? Clara clutched the Colt, knuckles white. What now? Ethan peeked over the stump, eyes scanning the brush. You stay low. Don't fire unless they get close. And you? I introduced myself. He slid along the ridge, low and silent, a shadow among thorns. His boots moved with the memory of old ambush, of men bleeding in the dark with prayers still on their tongues. The first gunman didn't see him until it was too late. Ethan rose behind a boulder, fired once, clean through the man's shoulder. The bandit screamed and dropped his rifle, rolling down the hill like meat tossed to gravity. The others panicked. One broke cover, running for better ground. Ethan dropped him with 2 shots, then ducked as return fire shredded the brush inches. From his head, meanwhile, Clara moved. She didn't think, just felt, slid along the ridge like Ethan taught her, found a narrow gap between 2 rocks, aimed and waited. When one of the men crept forward, boots crunching just a hair too loud. She breathed steady and pulled the trigger. He crumpled without a word. Her hands trembled, just once, then stilled. Ethan heard the shot, glanced toward her position, and gave the faintest nod. The last man was smart. He didn't charge, didn't run. Just disappeared into the tree line, a ghost retreating into daylight. Let him go, Ethan muttered. That one'll carry word. Let him carry fear with it. He climbed back to Clara's position, breathing hard but steady. You hit? She asked. Only my coat, he said. You? Just my soul, Ethan almost smiled. Then you're doing better than most. They buried the bodies quick, no prayers, just dirt. The man Clara shot had a knife in his boot, a patch on his vest that read Red River Born. They're not letting go, Clara whispered. No, and they won't, not while they think you're the key to your father. What if I am? Then they'll never stop. Not until you give them something worse to fear. She looked up at him. Like what? Ethan stared toward the east, where the old church sat quiet beneath the cliffs. Like a name they can't bury. They rode hard through the rest of the day, cutting through burned-out hills and old mining scars, past dry creeks and towns that had forgotten their own names. When the church finally came into view, the sun was a bleeding disk behind the ridgeline. It wasn't much, a single spire, half-fallen, and a bell that hadn't rung in years. But there was smoke from the chimney and a man on the steps sharpening a blade. That him? Clara asked. That's Grayson, Ethan said. He ain't a priest anymore, but he remembers how to keep wolves outside. He's trustworthy. He's worse than that, Ethan said. He's honest. They dismounted. Slow, dust swirling around their boots. Grayson looked up, eyes catching the light like flint. You brought ghosts, preacher. I brought a girl, Ethan said. One worth dying for. Then you'd best come inside, Grayson replied. Because hell's not far behind you. The inside of the church smelled of old cedar, gun oil, and secrets too heavy to confess. Pews had been torn out and replaced with crates. Rifles leaned against the pulpit, and the altar bore the scars of too many knives. Grayson moved like a man who didn't flinch anymore. His hair was silver at the edges, face weathered like sun-baked. Stone and his hands, calloused and quick, didn't leave the blade he was honing. You still collecting strays, Ethan? He asked, not looking up. Only the ones who don't know how to die quiet, Ethan replied. Clara stood by the doorway, eyes sweeping the room. This doesn't look like a church. It ain't? Grayson said. Not since they hung the last preacher out front for burying an outlaw in holy ground. And you stayed? I had nowhere else. Grayson finally met her eyes. You his trouble? No, Clara said. I'm my own. Grayson gave a short laugh. She live. Ethan stepped toward the back wall where a map was nailed over bullet holes. Red River's still moving west. We ran into a hunting party near Copper Ridge. 4 men, only 1 walked away. You think he'll bring more? I'm counting on it. Grayson nodded slowly. You want this to end here. I want it to end, Ethan said. And this is the only place that's ever buried ghosts proper. Clara stepped forward. We fight them? No, Ethan said. We make them bleed for every step. They came for a girl, let them find something else. You sure we'll survive? I'm sure we can make them wish they didn't. Grayson pulled a Winchester from behind the pulpit and tossed it to Ethan. Still shoot straight. Barrels hot from the last sermon. How many guns you got left? Enough for a Sunday crowd, not much more. That'll do. That night, they boarded windows, set traps, stacked crates near every entrance. Clara learned fast. How to load a rifle, how to brace a door, how to look at fear without blinking. Ethan watched her as she moved, steady and sharp, nothing. Like the girl who'd walked into the saloon asking about a scar, she was hardening, and he didn't know whether to be proud or sorry. Just before dawn, Grayson lit a lantern and hung it in the steeple, a signal, bright and bold, a challenge. They'll come, he said. Sooner than you want, Ethan nodded. Outside, the desert was quiet, too quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Clara sat near the door, her Colt resting on her knee. I had a dream. Again, she said softly. This time the fire wasn't in our cabin, it was here, the church burning, you and me inside. You scared? Ethan asked. No, she whispered, not anymore. He didn't reply, just checked the chamber of his gun and stared out the slats. They'll be here by sunrise. How do you know? Because I'd come now if I were them. A moment later, the first hoofbeat echoed in the distance, then another, then dozens. Grayson stood slowly, cracked his neck, and whispered, "Sermon's about to start." Clara loaded her last bullet and said, "Let them come." The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon when the riders came. Dust rose behind them like a veil, horses pounding through the brittle brush, their silhouettes black against the gray morning. There were at least a dozen, maybe more, shapes wrapped in, coats and shadows, rifles, slung low, eyes hidden beneath wide brims. Red River men, every one of them riding like the devil owed them coin. Ethan watched from the steeple, field glasses cold against his face. "They're splitting left and right," he called down. "Trying to flank us," Grayson grunted from below. "Good, let them try." Clara knelt behind a barricade of crates, fingers tight around her Colt, breath calm. She didn't tremble now. She didn't hesitate, she just waited. Outside, the riders slowed near the fence line, scanning the boarded windows and broken bell tower. One of them, taller, meaner, with a red scarf tied at his throat, stepped forward. "Ethan Rowe," his voice carried like a knife. "We know you're in there. We just want the girl. Give her up and we walk away." Ethan shouted back, "You're lying," the rider laughed. Maybe not. "But you're outnumbered." "I've been outnumbered since the day I buried my brother," Ethan called. "Didn't stop me then either." Silence fell, and then a shot rang out. It missed the window by inches, splitting wood and sending splinters flying. Clara flinched but held steady. "That the signal?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "That's the signal." Gunfire erupted, echoing through the hollow churchyard like thunder striking bone. Grayson fired from the front steps, dropping one rider before the others could scatter. Ethan picked off another from the steeple, clean through the chest, his body hit in the ground with a muffled thud. They returned fire, but the church held. Every board, every window, every stone had been placed with memory and blood. Clara fired once, twice, her aim sharp. She hit a man in the leg, sent him crawling. Another round shattered the crate beside her, but she didn't duck. She just kept shooting. The Red River boys pushed forward, but it wasn't a charge. It was desperation. They hadn't expected this kind of resistance. They hadn't expected a girl who didn't blink and a preacher with gunpowder in his veins. One tried to breach the side door. Grayson met him with a knife. The scream was short. The silence afterward even shorter. Clara reloaded, fingers shaking only now. She turned to Ethan, who was crouched behind the pulpit, blood on his sleeve. "You hit?" "Just a scratch," he said, gritting his teeth. "You?" "Not yet. Keep it that way." Another shot rang out. The front window exploded. A bottle of fire followed, a homemade bomb that lit the pews in sudden flame. Smoke curled fast, thick and acrid. Grayson cursed, kicked it out with his boot. "They're getting clever," he said. "Let's get cruel." Ethan grabbed the old Winchester and swung open the front door. He stepped out onto the porch, aimed, and fired 3 times. Fast, merciless, precise. 3 bodies fell, the rest scattered. Dust and screams and hoofbeats, a man shouted, "Pull back! Regroup!" Clara stepped beside him. "They're running." "No," Ethan said. "They're reloading? Then what do we do?" "We remind them why they came afraid." And with that, they stepped into the rising light, guns drawn, hearts iron. The church behind them smoldered. The desert ahead waited for the next name it would swallow. This wasn't survival anymore. This was war. And they were just getting started. Smoke drifted in lazy spirals from the broken windows as the last of the morning shadows slid off the canyon floor. The Red River gang had pulled back beyond the fence line. Regrouping behind the rocks and dry mesquite, their shouts echoing through the still air like thunder waiting its cue. Ethan stood at the edge of the church steps, barrel smoking, blood dripping slowly down his forearm. Clara was just behind him, breathing heavy, eyes locked on the distant figures that paced like wolves. Just out of reach, Grayson limped to the doorway, shotgun reloaded, jaw clenched. "That bought us 10 minutes, maybe less." "That's all we need," Ethan said, already moving. "You see a way out?" "No," Ethan muttered, "but I see a way through." He pointed to the ridge behind the church, where the canyon narrowed into a twisting arroyo, barely wide enough for a horse. "We funnel them in, one shot at a time. You think they'll follow?" Grayson grinned. "They followed you across 2 counties. They'll follow into hell." Ethan turned to Clara. "You ride hard, you make it through first. Don't stop. Not without you." "Clara." "No," she said. "I'm done running alone." He looked at her, really looked, dirt on her face, soot in her hair, resolve like steel. She was no longer the girl in the saloon. "All right," he said. "Then we ride together." They mounted up fast, Grayson on a gray mule with a bad attitude. And a better kick, Ethan pulling Clara onto the moray behind him? Bullets whined past as they broke from cover, the gang shouting, rising, giving chase. They galloped toward the canyon throat, dust boiling around them, rifle shots cracking off stone and sage. Behind, the gang surged, desperate, now certain the end was near. But the arroyo tightened quick walls, steep and narrow, and the riders were forced into single file. That's when Ethan wheeled the horse around. "Now," he whispered. Grayson dismounted, knelt behind a stone ledge, and fired. The first rider dropped. The second slammed into him and crumpled. Clara aimed over Ethan's shoulder, firing once. Twice, one missed, one didn't. Chaos spread like fire. The Red River men shouted, horses screamed, and dust swallowed everything. Ethan's aim was merciless. One, then another. He didn't count anymore. They weren't names, just ends, just reckoning. One rider made it through the chaos, face twisted with rage, coat flapping like wings. He raised a rifle. Clara didn't blink. She pulled the trigger. The man fell from the saddle like a sack of bones. Then silence, long, heavy, brutal silence. The canyon walls echoed nothing but the settling dust and the soft breath of horses coming down from fear. Ethan stepped forward, Colt still raised. Grayson scanned the ridge. Clara slowly lowered her arm. "Is it over?" she asked. Ethan listened, watched. Then finally he holstered the Colt. "If they've got any sense, the rest are riding hard the other way." Grayson spit in the dirt. "If they had sense, they wouldn't have followed you in the first place?" Ethan turned to Clara. "You? All right? I will be," she said. "You?" He looked down at his bloody sleeve. "Still breathing. Then I guess we won." Ethan didn't answer. He just stared toward the horizon, where the sky was finally turning gold. "Not yet," he said. "But we're closer than we've ever been." They rode until the sun sat high, sweat streaking the dust on their faces. Silence wrapped tight around them like a shared confession. The worst of the gang was behind them. That much Ethan believed. But belief didn't mean safety, not in a land where vengeance rode longer than memory. They stopped at a ridge overlooking an old watering hole, nothing more than a cracked basin and a few stubborn reeds clinging to life. Grayson dismounted first, stretching his bad leg and wincing. "Place is still here," he muttered. "Didn't expect that?" "You expect too little," Ethan said. "That's why you're still alive." Clara slid off the mare, her legs stiff, her eyes still sharp despite the weight in them. "We can rest?" she asked. "A little," Ethan replied, "but not long." Grayson knelt beside the dry basin and scooped a handful of warm mud. "Wasn't always like this," he said. "Used to be water up to your knees. Kids used to race frogs across it." "What happened?" Clara asked. "Same thing that always happens," Grayson said. "Men came." Ethan unbuckled his holster, sat on a stone, and pulled off his coat. The blood had dried, crusted around. The wound like rust on iron. Clara crouched beside him without being asked. "Let me see," she said. He raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. She tore a strip from the hem of her shirt and soaked it in canteen water. "This'll sting. So does the rest of me." She cleaned the wound, quiet, focused. Grayson watched from a distance but didn't interrupt. After a while, Clara said, "When this is over, where will you go?" Ethan looked toward the horizon. "Wherever the dust stops following me. And if it doesn't, then I keep riding." She tied the cloth tight around his arm, then sat beside him, shoulder brushing his. "I don't want to keep running." "Then don't." "But you are." Ethan turned, eyes meeting hers. "You think I don't want peace? I think you don't believe you deserve it." The words sat between them like a loaded gun. Grayson stood and walked a few paces away, giving them space he didn't need to be told they wanted. Ethan looked down at the Colt resting on his thigh. "I've buried too many to believe in clean endings," he said. "And I've buried too much to stop looking for one," Clara replied. He stared at her then, really stared. The defiance in her jaw, the sadness behind her strength. She wasn't a girl anymore. She hadn't been for days. Maybe never was. "You're your father's daughter," he said. "Maybe," she said. "But I'm not his shadow." The wind stirred, carrying dust across the cracked basin. A hawk cried overhead. Grayson returned with a grim look. "Smoke," he said. "South Ridge moving fast." Ethan stood. "How many?" Hard to tell, but not friendly. We ride? Grayson nodded. We run out of road if we don't. Ethan turned to Clara. You ready? She rose, hand on her gun. I've been ready since they burned everything. I had. They mounted up, the old mare snorting like she already knew what was coming. Ethan looked once more at the dry basin, then the smoke in the distance. No sermons today, he said. Grayson smirked. Good, I never liked the hymns anyway. And they rode, 3 silhouettes cutting across the desert, heading not toward safety, but toward the fire. Because sometimes the only way out of the past is to walk straight through it. They reached the south ridge by dusk, wind, pushing hard from the east, carrying heat and the unmistakable scent of trouble. Smoke coiled low on the horizon, drifting from a line of trees along the dry riverbed. Grayson scanned it through the spyglass, jaw tight. Campfire, he muttered. Maybe 2, not cattlemen, not drifters. Ethan stood beside him, arms crossed. Weapons? Didn't see any, but they're smart. Keeping low. Clara held her reins, eyes narrowed at the trail below. You think it's them? No doubt, Ethan said. Red River doesn't know how to die easy. So what now? Now, he said, we stop waiting for them to hunt us. Grayson nodded. Strike first. Ethan glanced toward Clara. You ever shoot a man who didn't know you were? There? She hesitated, then shook her head. Then this won't feel right. But it'll keep you breathing. She didn't flinch. Tell me where to aim. They moved like ghosts through the brush, circling wide and slow. The canyon edge bent into a low slope, enough to give them cover and vision. From their perch, the camp was barely visible. 2 lean-tos, 1 cook fire, and 4 men hunched over coffee and cards. One of them laughed, a sound too loud for the silence they carried. Grayson pointed. That one in the blue coat, that's Fitch, used to gut mules for fun back in Laredo. The one with the black hat? Ethan asked. That's Riker, shot a marshal's wife and blamed the Apaches. Clara whispered. And the others? Grayson shrugged. Dead soon. Ethan handed Clara a rifle. Breathe slow. Light up your shot. Don't shoot to scare, shoot to stop. Clara took the weapon, nestled it against her shoulder, and stared. Down the scope like she was looking at a different version of herself. Which one? The loud one, Ethan said. He's the one that breaks the others. They waited. The wind dipped. The fire cracked. Clara squeezed the trigger. The rifle barked. The man in the blue coat dropped like stone, cards scattering from his hand like dead leaves. The others shouted, scrambled. Ethan fired next, hitting. The man who reached for a rifle. Grayson dropped a third before they knew where the bullets came from. The last man turned to run. Clara fired again. He fell face first into the fire. Silence. Just smoke and the twitch of a dying boot. Ethan stood slowly. That's 4 fewer. Grayson exhaled, lowering his rifle. Still too many left? They climbed down into the camp, boots crunching. Through ash and blood, Clara stared at the man she'd shot. His eyes were open, she said. He didn't see me. That's how you live longer, Ethan said. She nodded but said nothing. Grayson kicked a saddlebag near the fire, then pulled out a folded piece of parchment. Map, he muttered. Routes, markers. Looks like they've got men near Drybell and farther west near the pass. They're fanning out, Ethan said. Looking for where she'd run next, so we make them stop looking, Grayson said. You thinking what I'm thinking? Red River's hideout? Clara blinked. You know where it is? We know where it used to be, Ethan said. And men like that, they don't build new places. They crawl back to old wounds. That's suicide, she whispered. No, Ethan said, voice cold and sharp. That's justice. Grayson rolled up the map, tucked it in his coat. We ride at dawn. No, Ethan said, we ride tonight. Why? Because they don't think we dare. And as the firelight danced across the rocks, 3 horses turned north, toward the edge of the known world, toward the heart of the men who refused to let go, and toward the last place Ethan ever wanted to see again. The trail north twisted like a scar through the hills, carved by old wagon wheels and washed out by storms that no one remembered but the land never forgot. They rode in silence, moonlight flickering off their coats, the sound of hooves muffled by dust and intent. Red River's hideout lay somewhere beyond the Drybell Pass, an old mining outpost turned outlaw fortress, forgotten by maps but remembered by men who still had wounds from it. Ethan rode ahead, eyes scanning the dark, jaw locked. Grayson kept to the flank, rifle resting across his lap like a question with no good answer. Clara stayed close, not because she was afraid, she wasn't anymore, But because something in her knew they wouldn't all return the same, maybe not. At all, around midnight they reached a ridge overlooking the pass. Below, tucked between jagged rock and twisted mesquite, flickered the soft glow of lanterns. Ethan dismounted, knelt, and studied the light. There, he said, behind those boulders. Same camp layout as before. They never change. Grayson pulled out the stolen map, compared it to the ridgeline. That's the main trail, he said, pointing. Leads straight through, but they'll have men posted there. Then we don't go through, Ethan muttered. We go around. From the east side, come at them like smoke. Clara crouched beside them. What do we do once we're inside? We break them, Ethan said. Quick, loud, final. You know who'll be there? One name for sure, he said. Cole Maddox, Grayson hissed low. That bastard still breathes? Too many let him, Ethan replied. But I won't. Clara looked between them. He's the one who led the raid on our cabin. My father said he used to be a lawman. Ethan nodded. He was, before the badge started weighing less than the gold it covered. You think he'll run? No, Ethan said. He'll smile. That's how you know he's about to kill? They waited until the moon dipped low and the night thickened. Then they moved, slow, silent, cutting through brush and stone until the camp was below them. Voices drifted up, laughter, boots. On gravel, the clang of tin cups, outlaws, relaxed, unaware. Ethan turned to Clara. This is where it breaks, you sure? I've been sure since they lit the fire that took my mother. Grayson handed her a knife. Keep it close. If you have to use it, don't hesitate. I won't, she said. Ethan drew his revolver and checked the cylinder one last time. We don't wait for them to draw. We don't speak names. We don't give warnings. We strike. Grayson moved first, taking down the outer sentry with a blade to the throat. No sound, no time for questions. Ethan was next, his revolver coughing twice. Two men dropped near the fire before they knew they were being hunted. Clara stayed behind cover, watching, counting shots, listening to the chaos unfold. Grayson's shotgun roared. Ethan fired again. Screams cut through the camp like wire. One man ran toward the trail. Clara stepped from behind the rocks and shot him before he could raise his weapon. Her hands were steady, her eyes colder than they'd ever been. Then the tent flap tore open. A tall man stepped out, bare-chested, eyes like flint, Cole Maddox. He didn't reach for a weapon. He just looked around at the bodies, the blood, the smoke. Ethan Rowe, he said, smiling. Been a long time. Ethan stepped forward, gun raised. Not long enough. Maddox grinned wider. You still dragging ghosts around? Only until they're done haunting. You here for the girl? Maddox asked, glancing toward Clara. She's got her own gun now. Then maybe she should pull the trigger. Ethan didn't look back. You want to? Clara stepped forward, face pale, voice even. No, why not? Maddox asked. You afraid? No, she said. But I want you to know, this isn't for justice. It's for everything you forgot when you laughed while the fire burned. Maddox's smile faltered, and then Ethan shot him. Once in the chest, once in the head, no words, no mercy. Just dust settling where a man used to stand. The camp was quiet again, blood soaking into the ground. Grayson exhaled. That it? That's him, Ethan said. The rest'll scatter now. Clara stared at the corpse. Do you feel better? Ethan holstered his gun. No. Me neither. The fire crackled behind them. The past didn't scream. It just faded, slow and quiet, but not gone, never gone. Dawn found them still by the campfire, the light rising soft and golden over a world scarred by what had just ended. Smoke curled gently above the ashes of Red River's last hideout. The air was quiet now, not the silence of danger, but the stillness of something finally finished. Ethan sat on a log, arms resting on his knees, hat tipped low. He hadn't said much since Maddox fell. Neither had Clara. Some reckonings don't need words, only breath, to prove you outlived them. Grayson packed the last of their gear, humming an old hymn beneath his breath. Something cracked and forgotten, but still familiar. We've seen. The worst of now, he muttered. Ain't much left out there that'll bite harder than this. Clara stood a few paces away, staring toward the horizon. What if they come again? She asked. They won't, Ethan said without looking up. Not after this. Not after what we left behind. She didn't reply, just watched the desert stretching wide and empty, like a page waiting for a name. Her fingers toyed with the leather strap of the Colt she hadn't used since the final shot. It was heavy now, heavier than ever, but somehow it felt like hers. You could go east, Grayson offered. Plenty of quiet towns that wouldn't know your name? Clara shook her head. I don't want quiet, I want honest. Even if it hurts, Ethan stood, then you're already ahead of most. Grayson mounted his mule, tipped his hat. I figure this is where we part ways. You sure? Ethan asked. Never been sure of anything, Grayson said. But I got a cabin up north and a bottle that's waited long enough. If you're ever near, there's a porch and a chair. He looked at Clara. You got more fight in you than most armies I've seen. Thank you, she said quietly. And then he rode off, slow and steady, disappearing into the morning like a man who knew how to leave things buried. Ethan turned to Clara. You know where you'll go? She thought a moment. There's a town west of here. Little place. My mother's people came from there. I think I'd like to know what they left behind. He nodded. You'll be safe? No, she said. But I'll be. Ready? He smiled then, just a little. The kind of smile that doesn't need teeth or joy, only truth. She climbed into the saddle. And you? I'll ride for a while, he said. Maybe find something that doesn't end with blood. You? Don't believe that, she said, half a smile on her lips. No, he replied. But sometimes it helps to lie to yourself on the way out. She offered her hand. He took it, held it firm, then let go. Clara turned her horse west. Ethan watched her disappear down the trail. The dust rising behind her like the final page of a book shutting in the wind. He stood alone now, the fire cold, the ghosts quieter. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan Rowe didn't feel like he was running. He just felt free.